When I handed my parents the eviction notice last Tuesday morning, watching their faces drain of color as they realized I now legally owned the land beneath their $400,000 dream house, I finally understood what true satisfaction felt like. After 28 years of being told I'd never amount to anything in real estate like your sister, I had just become their landlord, and they had 30 days to start paying rent or find somewhere else to live. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hi everyone, I'm Madison Torres, and this is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to owning the ground my parents walk on, literally. The morning it all came together started like any other Tuesday in Millbrook Falls, Vermont. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment above Chen's bakery on Maple Street, the same apartment my parents constantly reminded me was proof that I'd never make it in property investment like my golden child sister, Savannah. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to drive to their pristine colonial house in Ridgemont Heights to deliver news that would flip their entire world upside down. I'd been planning this moment for 18 months. 18 months of secret research, careful financial planning, and watching my parents parade Savannah's real estate empire around like a trophy while treating my own ambitions like a cute hobby that would eventually fizzle out. 18 months. Of Madison, honey, maybe you should focus on something more realistic. And Savannah has such a natural eye for investment properties, it's just not something everyone can do. Well, turns out everyone can do it. You just have to be willing to think bigger and more strategically than anyone expects. The drive to their house that morning felt surreal. I kept glancing at the manila envelope on my passenger seat, containing the deed that had arrived via certified mail just 3 days earlier. The deed that made me the official owner of the 1.2-acre plot of land at 847 Willowbrook Drive, the same address where my parents had lived for the past 12 years, the same house where they'd hosted countless dinner parties bragging about Savannah's latest property acquisition, the same dining room where they'd laughed when I mentioned wanting to get into real estate investment. Madison, my father, Robert Torres, had said during last Christmas dinner, cutting into his prime rib with that condescending smile he reserved for my unrealistic dreams. Property investment isn't like playing house. It takes real business. Acumen, connections, and frankly, a level of financial sophistication that not everyone possesses. My mother, Linda, had nodded sagely while refilling Savannah's wine glass. Your sister has closed on 4 properties this year alone. She has that instinct, that drive. Maybe you should consider something more, suited to your strengths. My strengths. Like my degree in finance from Burlington University meant nothing. Like my 3 years working as a mortgage underwriter had. Taught me nothing about property values, market analysis, or investment opportunities. Like the fact that I'd been quietly studying real estate law, zoning regulations, and land acquisition strategies in my spare time was just a cute little hobby. But sitting in my car that Tuesday morning, staring at their perfect house with its manicured lawn and expensive landscaping, I realized they were about to learn exactly what my strengths were capable of accomplishing. The house looked exactly the same as always, imposing, pristine, and completely secure in its position as the crown jewel of Ridgemont Heights. The same house where Savannah had announced her engagement to wealthy developer Marcus Kellerman, where she'd revealed her plans to flip a historic Victorian mansion downtown, where she'd casually mentioned purchasing a duplex as a little side investment, while I was still saving for a security deposit on my studio apartment. The same house where, just 6 months ago, during my nephew Tyler's 8th birthday party, my parents had made their biggest mistake yet. I remember the moment clearly. Savannah was holding court on the back deck, describing her latest acquisition, a 3-unit apartment building she'd snagged at auction, while our extended family listened with rapt attention. Uncle Pete asked how she managed to find such great deals, and my father launched into his favorite lecture about natural business instincts and understanding market opportunities. That's when I made the mistake of mentioning that I'd been researching some interesting properties myself, maybe looking into some land acquisition opportunities. The entire deck went quiet. Then my mother laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Madison," she said, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Land acquisition? Honey, that's serious investor territory. You need substantial capital, legal expertise, market, and knowledge. It's not something you just stumble into." "Your mother's right," my father added, flipping burgers on his expensive gas grill. "Savannah started small with that little condo renovation, built her way up. You can't just jump into commercial land deals without years of experience." But it was Savannah herself who delivered the final blow. She walked over, put her hand on my shoulder with that sweet, patronizing smile she'd perfected over the years, and said, "Madison, I love that you're interested in real estate, but maybe start with something more manageable, like a tiny starter home. Work your way up to actual investment properties over time." The implication was clear. I wasn't cut out for serious real estate investment. I was the little sister who needed to stay in her lane, be grateful for what she had, and leave the big deals to the people who understood such things. That night, lying in my studio apartment listening to the Chen's late-night prep work downstairs, I made a decision. I was going to prove them wrong. Not by starting small, not by following Savannah's path, but by making a move so bold and unexpected that it would permanently shift the family power dynamic. I was going to buy something they couldn't ignore, something that would force them to acknowledge my capabilities. I just had no idea how perfect an opportunity was about to present itself. 3 weeks later, while researching commercial properties online, I stumbled across something interesting in the Millbrook County Land Records database. Something that made me sit up straight in my desk chair and start taking very detailed notes. Something that was about to change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me properly introduce myself and explain how I got to this point. I'm Madison Elena Torres, 28 years old, and until last Tuesday, I was just another underestimated younger sibling living in the shadow of family expectations in Millbrook Falls, Vermont. By day, I work as a senior mortgage underwriter at Granite State Financial, a job that most people find mind-numbingly boring, but that I genuinely love. There's something deeply satisfying about analyzing loan applications, assessing property values, and understanding the intricate dance of real estate financing that most people never see. My office sits on the 3rd floor of a converted brick mill building downtown, with windows that overlook the Millbrook River and give me a perfect view of the town's modest skyline. It's not glamorous work. I spend most of my time reviewing credit reports, income statements, and property appraisals. But it's taught me more about real estate investment than any expensive seminar or business school course ever could. When you process hundreds of mortgage applications every year, you start to see patterns. You learn which neighborhoods are trending up, which property types hold their value, and most importantly, you understand exactly how much house people can actually afford versus how much they think they can afford. That knowledge would prove to be more valuable than I ever imagined. Live in a 480-square-foot studio apartment above Chen's family bakery on Maple Street, right in the heart of downtown Millbrook Falls. It's not much. A Murphy bed that folds down from the wall, a kitchenette with barely enough counter space for a coffee maker, and a bathroom so small I have to step into the shower to close the door. But it's mine, and after years of careful budgeting, I've managed to pay off my student loans and build up a respectable emergency fund. The Chens, Wei, and May have been my landlords for 3 years now, and they've become like surrogate parents to me. Wei always saves me a sesame bagel from the morning batch, and May occasionally invites me down for dinner when she's made too much of her incredible dumplings. They know about my family situation. It's hard to hide much when you live directly above someone's business, and they've never once made me feel small or insignificant the way my actual family does. Madison, Wei told me just last month while I was picking up my Saturday morning coffee, you have good head for numbers. Smart. Girl, your family, they don't see what we see. He was right, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. My current life might not look impressive from the outside, but I've worked incredibly hard to get here. After graduating from Burlington University with a finance degree and a 3.8 GPA, I spent 6 months desperately searching for entry-level positions while waiting tables at the Millbrook Diner. The job at Granite State Financial wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it came with benefits and a clear path for advancement. Over the past 4 years, I've been promoted twice. I started as a junior processor making $38,000 a year, got bumped up to loan officer at $45,000, and now as a senior underwriter, I'm making $58,000 annually. It's not Fortune 500 money, but in a town like Millbrook Falls, where the median household income hovers around $42,000, it's enough to live comfortably and save aggressively, and saving has been my obsession. While my peers were going out to Burlington's trendy restaurants or taking weekend trips to Montreal, I was clipping coupons, buying generic groceries, and putting 30% of every paycheck into a high-yield savings account. My entertainment budget consisted of library books, free hiking trails, and the occasional matinee movie ticket. My wardrobe came from outlet stores and end-of-season clearance racks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was purposeful. Every dollar I saved was a dollar toward my future independence, toward proving that I could build something meaningful with my life, even without family support or connections. The irony is that my job at Granite State Financial put me in a unique position to understand exactly how the local real estate market worked. I processed mortgages for first-time homebuyers struggling to afford starter homes, wealthy families upgrading to luxury properties, and investors looking to expand their portfolios. I saw which neighborhoods were appreciating fastest, which property types were in highest demand, and which areas were ripe for development. I also learned about the more obscure aspects of real estate transactions, things like land contracts, mineral rights, easements, and property tax liens. Most people buying homes never think about these details, but as an underwriter, I had to understand every aspect of property ownership to properly assess loan risk. That education would prove to be invaluable in ways I never anticipated. My personal life, admittedly, isn't much to write home about. I've been single for the past 2 years, mainly because dating in a small town while living above a bakery and working 60-hour weeks doesn't leave much time for romance. My last serious relationship was with Jake Morrison, a teacher at the Hawaii local high school who broke up with me because he said I was too focused on work and not spontaneous enough. He wasn't wrong. I am focused on work, and I'm not particularly spontaneous. But I'm also building something, creating a foundation for my future that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. Jake wanted someone who would drop everything, for last-minute weekend getaways and expensive dinners out. I wanted someone who understood that short-term sacrifices could lead to long-term security. We clearly weren't compatible. My social life consists mainly of occasional drinks with coworkers and monthly coffee dates with my college friend Emma, who moved to Portland after graduation but visits every few weeks. Emma is one of the few people who truly gets my family dynamics and has been encouraging me for years to stop trying to win their approval. Madison, she told me during her last visit, stirring honey into her latte at the local coffee shop. You're never going to be Savannah, and that's actually a good thing. Stop trying to compete on their terms and start playing your own game. At the time, I thought she was just being supportive. I had no idea how prophetic her words would turn out to be. The truth is, by most objective measures, I've built a perfectly respectable life for myself. I have a stable career, financial security, and genuine independence. I own my car outright, a reliable Honda Civic that I bought used and have maintained meticulously. I have excellent credit, a growing retirement account, and enough savings to weather most emergencies, but none of that seemed to matter to my family. In their eyes, I was still the quiet, unremarkable daughter who worked a regular job and lived in a tiny apartment, while Savannah was building her real estate empire and living in increasingly impressive homes. What they didn't know was that my regular job had given me access to information and insights that even successful real estate investors like Savannah rarely possessed. What they couldn't see was that my careful saving and modest lifestyle had given me something even more valuable than a flashy portfolio: liquid capital and the patience to wait for the perfect opportunity. That opportunity was about to present itself in the most unexpected way possible. To understand how I ended up serving my parents an eviction notice, you need to understand the Torres family dynamics that have been in play since I was old enough to walk. My sister Savannah is 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could talk, it was clear she was destined to be the star of our family show. Where I was quiet and observant, Savannah was bold and charismatic. Where I preferred books and puzzles, she commanded attention and worked every room like a natural-born politician. Savannah Elena Torres. Yes, we share the same middle name. Another way our parents tried to create some kind of symmetry that never quite worked was everything a small-town Vermont family could want in a golden child. She had strawberry blonde hair that caught the light perfectly, bright green eyes that sparkled when she smiled, and an effortless confidence that made adults fall all over themselves to help her succeed. Teachers loved her, neighbors adored her, and our extended family treated her like she was destined for greatness from birth. On the other hand, was the sensible one. Dark brown hair that never held a curl, serious brown eyes behind wire-rimmed, glasses from age 7, and a tendency to think before speaking that adults interpreted as shyness rather than wisdom. While Savannah was winning school elections and starring in community theater productions, I was getting perfect scores on standardized tests and reading 3 grade levels ahead. But academic achievement doesn't photograph as well as homecoming, crowns, and it certainly doesn't generate the kind of proud parent moments that fill up Facebook feeds. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was woven into the fabric of our daily lives so completely that for years I thought it was normal. Every family must have a designated star child and a designated supporting character, right? Savannah's bedroom was the larger of the 2 upstairs. Rooms with built-in bookshelves, a walk-in closet, and windows facing the backyard garden. My room was technically adequate: a single window, basic furniture, shared bathroom access, but the message was clear about who ranked where in the family hierarchy. When Savannah wanted to redecorate at age 14, our parents hired an interior designer and gave her a budget of $3,000. When I asked if I could paint my room a different color at 16, Mom handed me a can of generic beige paint from the hardware store clearance rack and told me to make do. The birthday parties were particularly brutal. Savannah's Sweet 16 was a catered affair at the Millbrook Country Club with 50 guests, a DJ, and a professional photographer. She got a brand new Honda CR-V with a custom license plate that read Savvy 16. My 16th birthday fell on a Tuesday, and we celebrated with grocery store cake in the kitchen while Dad watched the evening news. I got a used graphing calculator for school and a gift card to Target for $50. Madison doesn't need all the fuss, Mom explained to Aunt Carol when she asked why my birthday had been so low-key. She's more practical-minded. She appreciates useful gifts. Practical-minded. That became the family code for, we don't have to try as hard with Madison. The pattern extended to every aspect of our lives. When Savannah decided she wanted to try horseback riding, our parents enrolled her in expensive lessons at Windridge Stables and bought her a complete riding outfit. When I expressed interest in photography, they bought me a disposable camera from CVS and told me to see how much I really liked it first. Savannah got piano lessons, art classes, tennis coaching, and summer camps. I got library cards and told to develop my natural talents independently. The most painful part wasn't the money, though that stung. It was the casual assumption that I didn't deserve the same investment, the same attention, the same belief in my potential. Every family gathering reinforced the hierarchy. Savannah's latest achievements were announced with pride and discussed at length. My accomplishments were acknowledged with a quick, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation inevitably returned to whatever Savannah was doing. High school crystallized these patterns into something approaching cruelty. Savannah coasted through with B- grades while charming her way into advanced classes she wasn't qualified for. She dated the captain of the football team, got elected homecoming princess, and somehow convinced everyone that she was college material, despite rarely opening a textbook. Meanwhile, I was taking every AP class available, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and working part-time at the library to save money for college applications. I founded the school's first financial literacy club, won the regional math competition 2 years running, and scored in the 95th percentile on my SATs. Guess whose achievements got celebrated at the dinner table? When college application time arrived, our parents hired a private counselor to help Savannah craft her essays and identify target schools. They paid for multiple campus visits, standardized test prep courses, and application fees to 12 different universities. For me, they handed me a stack of brochures for in-state schools and told me to figure out the financial aid paperwork myself. "Savannah needs more guidance," Dad explained when I asked why I wasn't getting the same support. "You're naturally more self-sufficient. You'll figure it out." Self-sufficient. Another family euphemism for not worth the investment. The real gut punch came during our senior year when both of us were accepted to Burlington University. Savannah planned to major in communications with a minor in marketing. I planned to double major in finance and economics. Both programs cost exactly the same amount in tuition and fees. Our parents sat us down in the living room that spring and explained their college funding strategy. Savannah would receive full financial support, tuition, room and board, spending, money, and a car to get to campus. I would receive exactly half of that amount, with the expectation that I would work part-time to make up the difference. "It's only fair," Mom said, adjusting her reading glasses and speaking in that reasonable tone she used when delivering unreasonable decisions. "Savannah will need more support to succeed. College is going to be challenging for her. You've always been more academically inclined, so you'll be able to handle the extra responsibility." More academically inclined. Translation: Your success is inevitable, so we don't need to invest in it. I sat there doing quick math in my head. Even with my half funding, I'd need to work 25 hours a week minimum to cover my shortfall. Savannah would be free to focus entirely on her studies and social life. "What if I get scholarships?" I asked. "That would be wonderful," Dad said. "You could put any scholarship money toward reducing your work hours." "What about Savannah? Will she apply for scholarships too?" They exchanged a look. "Savannah's time is better spent on other activities," Mom said carefully. "Leadership opportunities, internships, networking. Scholarship applications are very time-consuming, so I would compete for merit-based aid to reduce my own financial burden, while Savannah's time was considered too valuable to waste on such mundane tasks." That summer, I worked 60 hours a week between my library job and a new position at Henderson's hardware store, saving every penny for college expenses. Savannah spent the summer at an unpaid internship at a Burlington marketing firm, an opportunity our parents had arranged through family connections, while living in a rented apartment that they paid for. "It's such valuable experience for her," Mom gushed to anyone who would listen. "She's learning so much about professional life." I was learning about professional life too, but apparently retail and library work didn't count as valuable experience in the same way. The dynamics followed us to college and beyond. Savannah struggled academically and socially, calling home in tears multiple times per week. Our parents immediately arranged for a tutor, increased her spending allowance, and made frequent care package deliveries. When she changed majors 3 times and extended her graduation timeline by a full year, they covered the additional costs without question. I maintained my academic performance while working part-time throughout college, graduated summa cum laude, in 4 years exactly, and was offered a position at Granite State Financial before I even finished my final semester. My parents' response was a congratulations card and dinner at Applebee's, but the real establishment of adult family dynamics happened during Savannah's post-graduation crisis period. Unable to find work in her chosen field, she moved back home and spent 8 months figuring herself out while our parents covered all her expenses. During this time, she met Marcus Kellerman at a networking event Dad had arranged for her. Marcus was everything our family valued: successful, well-connected, and wealthy enough to make Savannah's financial struggles disappear overnight. He owned a development company specializing in luxury residential projects, drove a BMW, and had the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having worried about money. Their relationship moved quickly, and within 6 months, Marcus was funding Savannah's entry into real estate. He connected her with established agents, introduced her to potential clients, and even provided the down payment for her first investment property, a small condo she renovated and flipped for a modest profit. Suddenly, Savannah was a real estate entrepreneur, and our parents couldn't contain their pride. Every family gathering became a showcase for her latest project, her growing portfolio, her natural instinct for property investment. "She has such an eye for potential," Mom would beam while showing relatives photos of Savannah's properties. On her phone, "Marcus says she's one of the most intuitive investors he's ever worked with." Meanwhile, I was quietly building my career, developing expertise in mortgage underwriting, and learning everything I could about real estate finance. But my knowledge came from processing paperwork, not from romantic connections to wealthy developers. So it didn't count as impressive. The family narrative was firmly established. Savannah was the natural entrepreneur destined for real estate success, and I was the steady, unremarkable daughter with a regular job who would never amount to anything particularly noteworthy. They had no idea I was about to prove them spectacularly wrong. The college years revealed just how deeply entrenched our family's double standards had become, and how those patterns would follow us well into our adult lives. While I was grinding through 60-hour weeks between classes and work, Savannah was discovering that college life didn't automatically cater to her the way high school had. Her first semester was a disaster. She failed 2 classes, barely, scraped by in the others, and spent most weekends calling home in tears about how unfair her professors were. My parents' response was immediate and comprehensive. They hired a professional academic coach at $200 per session, arranged for tutoring in every subject, and even contacted her professors directly to discuss accommodation strategies. When Savannah complained that her dorm roommate was too studious and made her feel bad about her social life, they paid the extra fees to get her a single room in the newest residence hall. During this same period, I was dealing with my own challenges. Working 25 hours a week while maintaining a full course load in finance meant I had virtually no social life, and my budget was so tight that I was eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. When I mentioned during a family phone call that I was struggling to afford textbooks for my advanced economics course, my mother's response was typical. "Maybe you could find used copies online, or see if the library has them available." Meanwhile, Savannah was getting a monthly allowance that exceeded my entire income from both jobs combined. The contrast became even more stark when Savannah decided to change majors at the end of sophomore year. Communications wasn't creative enough for her, so she switched to art history, which added an extra year to her degree timeline and required several expensive summer courses to catch up. Our parents absorbed the additional costs without hesitation, and praised her for following her passion and refusing to settle for something that didn't inspire her. When I mentioned that I was considering adding a minor in real estate law, which would require 2 additional courses but could significantly boost my career prospects, The response was noticeably different. "Madison, you're already taking on so much," Dad said during one of our monthly check-in calls. "Are you sure you want to add more to your plate? Maybe focus on finishing strong with what you've already committed to." The subtext was clear. Savannah's academic journey could expand and evolve as needed, but I was expected to stay within predetermined boundaries and not ask for additional support. By senior year, the patterns had calcified into something approaching absurdity. Savannah was struggling to complete her thesis on the evolution of pop art in American consumer culture, a topic she'd chosen because it sounded impressive but which she clearly didn't understand. Our parents hired a graduate student to help her with research, which essentially meant writing large portions of the paper for her. I was completing my honors thesis on predatory lending practices in rural Vermont markets, conducting original research with local banks and credit unions, and presenting my findings at the New England Undergraduate Research Conference. My parents' level of interest in this achievement could be measured by the fact that they forgot to ask about my presentation until 3 weeks after it had happened. "Oh, right, your bank thing," Mom said when I finally brought it up. "How did that go? My bank thing." A year of research that had caught the attention of several regional financial institutions and earned me early job offers was reduced to your bank thing. The graduation ceremonies perfectly encapsulated our family dynamics. Savannah graduated a year behind me, with a 2.8 GPA and no job prospects, but the celebration was elaborate. Dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Burlington, a weekend family, vacation to celebrate her achievement, and a graduation gift of a new MacBook Pro for her job search. I graduated summa cum laude with a job offer already in hand and 3 academic awards, but the celebration was a brief lunch at a chain restaurant before my parents rushed back home to help Savannah move out of her apartment. "We're so proud of both our girls," Mom posted on Facebook, alongside photos from both graduations. But anyone looking at the pictures could see the difference in energy and investment. Savannah's graduation album had 47 photos. Mine had 6. The post-graduation period was when the family dynamics became truly toxic. Savannah moved back home and entered what our parents generously called her transition period. For 8 months, she slept until noon, helped herself to whatever was in the refrigerator, and spent her days browsing social media while half-heartedly applying to marketing positions she was vastly underqualified for. Our parents not only tolerated this arrangement, they enabled it. They covered her car insurance, her cell phone, her health insurance, and gave her spending money for clothes and entertainment. When she complained about being bored, they arranged for her to volunteer at the local art museum, a position that came with its own parking space and flexible schedule. Meanwhile, I was working my entry-level position at Granite State Financial, commuting an hour each way from my studio apartment and building my career from the ground up. I was analyzing loan applications, learning banking regulations, and developing the expertise that would later prove invaluable. But because I was self-sufficient and didn't require daily emotional support, my progress was largely ignored. The turning point came when Savannah met Marcus at a networking event that Dad had specifically arranged for her. Marcus Kellerman was 34, recently divorced, and looking for a project. Savannah, with her combination of neediness and potential, fit the bill perfectly. Marcus didn't just fall for Savannah. He fell for the idea of molding her into his version of a successful woman. Within weeks of meeting her, he was paying for professional development courses, business coaching sessions, and networking memberships. He introduced her to his contacts in the real estate world and even provided the initial capital for her. First, property investment. "Marcus sees so much potential in Savannah," Mom gushed during one of our increasingly infrequent family dinners. "He says she has natural instincts for business that you just can't teach." Natural instincts. This about a woman who had needed tutoring to pass basic college math and had never balanced a checkbook in her life. But Marcus's investment in Savannah paid off, at least superficially. With his connections and financial backing, she successfully flipped her first property, a small condo that Marcus had essentially selected, funded, and supervised the renovation of. The profit was modest, but it was enough to establish Savannah as a real estate entrepreneur in our family's narrative. Suddenly, every family gathering revolved around Savannah's business ventures. She would hold court at the dinner table, describing her latest project with the confidence of someone who had never actually had to qualify for a loan or analyze market trends independently. Our relatives hung on every word, asking for investment advice from someone whose primary qualification was having a wealthy boyfriend with industry connections. "Savannah has such a good eye for undervalued properties," Uncle Pete would say, nodding sagely. "She can walk into a place and immediately see its potential." The irony was staggering. I was spending my days analyzing property values, market trends, and investment potential as part of my job. But because my knowledge came from processing paperwork rather than flipping houses, it didn't register as expertise in our family's collective consciousness. The final insult came during the Christmas following Savannah's first successful flip. Our parents presented her with a framed photo of the renovated condo and a custom business card holder engraved with Savannah Torres, real estate investor. My gift was a gift card to Barnes & Noble and a coffee mug with "World's Okayest Daughter" printed on it. They thought the mug was funny. I thought it was accidentally honest. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom during my brief holiday visit, I made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of being the responsible one who got taken for granted. I was tired of watching Savannah get credit for achievements that were largely funded and orchestrated by other people. And I was especially tired of being treated like the family's consolation prize while my sister was celebrated for mediocrity wrapped in expensive packaging. I was going to stop playing by their rules and start playing by my own. I just had no idea yet what form that rebellion would take, or how perfectly the universe was about to align to give me the opportunity of a lifetime. The answer would come through the most unlikely source imaginable. A routine afternoon of processing mortgage applications that would reveal a secret about my parents' perfect life that they had no idea I was about to discover. The stark contrast between Savannah's supported success and my independent struggles became even more pronounced as we entered our mid-20s. While I was methodically building my career one mortgage application at a time, Savannah was constructing what appeared to be a real estate empire with Marcus's guidance and financial backing. The difference was that her empire had a foundation built on other people's money and connections, while I was slowly accumulating knowledge, experience, and most importantly, liquid capital that nobody in my family seemed to notice or value. By my third year at Granite State Financial, I had developed a reputation among my colleagues as the person who could spot problems in loan applications that others missed. I had an uncanny ability to identify discrepancies in income documentation, catch inflated property appraisals, and flag potential fraud before it became the bank's problem. This skill set made me valuable to my employer and earned me steady promotions. But it also gave me insights into the local real estate market that most investors could only dream of having. I knew which neighborhoods were experiencing quiet appreciation because I processed mortgages for the buyers moving in. I understood which property types were becoming harder to finance because I saw the loan rejections. Most importantly, I had access to comprehensive data about property values, market trends, and upcoming developments because banks need that information to assess lending risk. While Savannah was learning about real estate investment through Marcus's connections and carefully curated opportunities, I was getting a graduate-level education in market analysis just by doing my job well. The irony was delicious, even if nobody else appreciated it yet. My personal financial situation was improving steadily, though my family remained oblivious to this progress. I had paid off my student loans 2 years ahead of schedule, built an emergency fund that could cover 8 months of expenses, and was consistently saving 40% of my income through a combination of aggressive budgeting and strategic side work. I had started doing freelance financial consulting for small businesses on weekends, helping them prepare loan applications and understand their financing options. This freelance work was teaching me about business operations, cash flow analysis, and investment strategies from the ground up. I was essentially running my own small consulting practice while maintaining my full-time job, but because it wasn't flashy or social media worthy, my family had no idea it existed. Meanwhile, Savannah's Instagram feed was a carefully curated showcase of real estate success. Photos of property staging, before and after renovation shots, and inspirational quotes about entrepreneurship filled her timeline. She had developed a personal brand around being a lifestyle real estate investor, and had even started a blog called Savvy Property Solutions, where she shared tips about home design and investment strategies. What her followers didn't see was Marcus in the background of every deal, providing the capital, the contractors, the market analysis, and often the actual decision-making. Savannah had become very good at presenting Marcus's work as her own insights, and he seemed happy to let her take the public credit as long as he maintained actual control over the investments. The blog posts were particularly galling to read. Savannah would write about trusting your instincts and seeing potential where others see problems, as if she had developed these skills through years of experience rather than having them handed to her by someone else's expertise. She wrote about building wealth through real estate, while failing to mention that her initial investment capital had come entirely from her boyfriend's bank account. Our parents ate it up completely. They shared every blog post on their own social media accounts, commented enthusiastically on every Instagram photo, and found ways to work Savannah's real estate success into every conversation with friends and extended family. Did you see Savannah's latest project? Mom would ask anyone who would listen, pulling out her phone to show pictures of a renovated Victorian duplex. She has such an eye for these older properties. Marcus says she's a natural at seeing past the surface issues to the underlying value that Marcus had identified, financed, and supervised the realization of, but those details never made it into the family narrative. During this same period, I was quietly building relationships with local contractors, real estate agents, and small business owners through my freelance consulting work. I was learning about construction costs, renovation timelines, and the practical realities of property management from people who had been in the business for decades. This network was becoming increasingly valuable as I started to understand not just the financial side of real estate investment, but the operational challenges that could make or break a project. I was also developing a reputation for discretion and reliability. My consulting clients knew they could trust me with sensitive financial information and rely on my analysis to be accurate and unbiased. This reputation would prove crucial when the opportunity I had been unconsciously preparing for finally presented itself. The contrast in our approaches to financial planning was stark. Savannah's investment strategy was entirely dependent on Marcus's continued support and market knowledge. She had no emergency fund, no backup plan, and no understanding of how to analyze deals independently. Her success was impressive on the DI surface, but built on a foundation that could crumble if Marcus decided to redirect his attention elsewhere. My approach was methodical and sustainable. Every dollar I invested in my education, my network, or my savings account was a dollar that belonged entirely to me. I wasn't building wealth quickly, but I was building it securely, with knowledge and resources that nobody could take away from me. The family dynamics during this period were exhausting. Every gathering became a showcase for Savannah's latest achievement, with our parents playing the role of proud promoters and me cast as the appreciative audience. I was expected to be impressed by deals I could have analyzed better than anyone at the table, amazed by market insights that were obvious to anyone who understood basic real estate principles, and grateful for investment advice from someone whose primary qualification was having access to someone else's money. "Madison, you should really think about getting into real estate," Savannah told me during one particularly condescending family dinner. I mean, I know you're comfortable with your bank job, but there's so much more potential in property investment. I could introduce you to some people, help you get started with something small. Something small. As if I was a beginner who needed to start with training wheels while she operated at a sophisticated level I couldn't hope to understand. That's very generous, I replied, cutting into my chicken and keeping my voice neutral. I'll definitely keep that in mind. What I kept to myself was that I had been researching investment opportunities for months, building cash reserves that exceeded what most first-time investors could access, and developing market knowledge that came from analyzing hundreds of deals rather than participating in a handful of heavily supported transactions. The most frustrating part was watching our parents praise Savannah for qualities I had been demonstrating for years without recognition. Her business acumen consisted largely of agreeing with Marcus's recommendations and presenting them confidently. Her financial discipline was actually Marcus's financial discipline applied to her projects. Her market instincts were his. Market instincts filtered through her enthusiasm. But because her success was visible and social, it counted in ways that my quiet competence never would. I started to realize during this period that I would never earn my family's respect by achieving success in conventional ways. No matter how well I performed at my job, how much money I saved, or how much expertise I developed, I would always be the supporting character in Savannah's story. If I wanted to change the family narrative, I would need to do something so unexpected and undeniable that they couldn't ignore or minimize it. I just had no idea that the opportunity to do exactly that was about to fall directly into my lap, disguised as a routine mortgage application that would reveal a secret about my parents' financial situation that would change everything forever. The opportunity that would change everything came disguised as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Granite State Financial. I was working through a stack of mortgage refinancing applications, the kind of routine paperwork that had become second nature after 4 years in the business. Coffee growing cold at my elbow, classical music playing softly through my desktop, speakers, the familiar rhythm of reviewing credit reports and property appraisals that made up the bulk of my workday. That's when I saw the application that made my blood freeze in my veins. A refinancing request for 847 Willowbrook Drive, Ridgemont Heights. My parents' address. My first thought was that there had been some kind of mistake. My parents owned their house outright. They had mentioned paying off the mortgage several years earlier, had even celebrated with a small dinner party where Dad made a toast about finally being debt-free. And Mom posted photos on Facebook with captions about achieving the American dream. But there it was in black and white, Robert and Linda Torres requesting a $275,000 cash-out refinance on a property they supposedly owned free and clear. I should have recused myself immediately. Bank policy was crystal clear about handling financial documents for family members. Any potential conflict of interest had to be disclosed, and the file transferred to another underwriter. But something about the numbers on the application didn't add up, and my professional instincts kicked in before my ethical training could stop me. The property appraisal listed the house's current value at $410,000, which seemed reasonable for their neighborhood. The requested loan amount of $275,000 would give them about $275,000 in cash after closing costs, which was a substantial sum for a couple in their early 60s. But what caught my attention was the stated purpose of the loan: debt consolidation and home improvements. Debt consolidation. My parents, who had supposedly been debt-free for years and lived relatively modest lifestyles, needed $275,000 for debt consolidation. I knew I should stop reading and transfer the file, but I couldn't help myself. Their financial documents told a story that was completely at odds with the image they had been projecting to me and the rest of our family. Credit card balances totaling over $85,000 spread across multiple accounts. A home equity line of credit with a $45,000 balance that I had never heard them mention. Auto loans on both of their cars despite their claims about buying vehicles with cash. Most shocking of all was a series of large cash transfers, deposits and withdrawals in amounts ranging from $15,000 to $35,000 that appeared to correspond with dates I recognized. Savannah's wedding expenses, the down payment on her first investment property, Marcus's business expansion that Savannah had mentioned casually during family dinners. My parents hadn't just been supporting Savannah's lifestyle and business ventures with their own money. They had been borrowing money to fund her success, essentially mortgaging their retirement security to maintain the fiction that their golden child was a self-made entrepreneur. The pattern was devastatingly clear once I started looking for it. Every major milestone in Savannah's adult life had been subsidized by loans that my parents had taken out secretly. The emergency fund they had tapped to help her through her post-graduation transition period had actually been a personal loan for $25,000. The gift of capital for her first property investment had come from a cash advance on their home equity line. But the most infuriating discovery was buried in the supporting documentation. A financial statement showing monthly payments to S. Torres in the amount of $2,800. Not loan repayments, gifts. My parents were paying Savannah nearly $3,000 every month, money they were borrowing against their house to afford. I sat there staring at the documents, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under my carefully ordered world. While I had been struggling to pay my own way through college, working multiple jobs and living on ramen noodles, my parents had been secretly funding a monthly allowance for Savannah that exceeded my entire income. While I had been praised for my independence and self-sufficiency, they had been going into debt to ensure that Savannah never had to experience real financial pressure. The hypocrisy was staggering. Every lecture about fiscal responsibility, every comment about living within your means, every dismissal of my requests for help because I needed to learn to stand on my own, all of it had been delivered while they were systematically destroying their own financial security to prop up Savannah's lifestyle. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by something else: opportunity. I had stumbled across information that revealed the true foundation of my family's financial priorities, but more importantly, I had discovered that my parents were in a much more precarious position than anyone realized. They were essentially house-rich and cash-poor, with mounting debt obligations and a retirement timeline that was rapidly approaching. More intriguingly, their mortgage application revealed something that most people would never notice, but that my professional training made impossible to ignore. They didn't actually own the land under their house. Property records are public information, but most homeowners don't understand the distinction between owning a house and owning the land it sits on. When my parents had purchased 847 Willowbrook Drive 12 years earlier, they had bought the house and improvements, but the land itself was held under a long-term ground lease with Millbrook County. The lease had been structured as a 99-year agreement with minimal annual payments, which made it essentially invisible to most buyers and their real estate agents. But ground leases are investment vehicles, and like any investment vehicle, they can be bought and sold. I spent the rest of that afternoon researching the legal structure of their ground lease, the county's policies on lease transfers, and the current market value of similar land parcels in their neighborhood. What I discovered was a loophole so elegant and so perfectly suited to my situation that it felt like the universe had handed me a gift. The ground lease for 847 Willowbrook Drive was coming up for its first renewal option in 18 months. When that happened, the leaseholder, currently Millbrook County, had the right to either renew the lease under the existing terms or sell the lease to a private investor. If the lease was sold, the new owner would become the landlord for anyone living on that property. More importantly, county records showed that similar ground leases in the area had been selling for between $180,000 and $220,000, depending on the property value and remaining lease term. The lease for my parents' property, given the house's $410,000 value and prime location, would likely sell for around $200,000. I had been saving aggressively for 4 years, building my emergency fund and investment capital with no specific goal beyond financial security. My consulting business had been generating steady additional income, and my modest lifestyle meant that most of my earnings went directly into savings. When I checked my account balances that evening, I realized I had just enough liquid capital to make this work. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to have something my family couldn't ignore, dismiss, or minimize. I was going to become their landlord. The irony was so perfect it felt like poetic justice. They had spent years telling me I would never amount to anything in real estate, would never have the business acumen or capital to compete with Savannah's success. They had funded her property empire with borrowed money while treating my financial goals as unrealistic fantasies. Now I was going to buy the ground underneath their feet and prove exactly what kind of real estate investor I could be when I stopped playing by their rules and started playing by my own. The transformation from ignored daughter to property owner was about to begin, and they had no idea what was coming. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in strategic planning and absolute secrecy. Every day at work, I maintained my normal routine, processing applications, attending meetings, making small talk with colleagues, while spending every free moment researching property law, ground lease transfers, and the specific procedures for purchasing county-held assets in Vermont. I couldn't afford to make a single mistake or leave any detail to chance because I would only get one opportunity to pull this off. My first challenge was understanding the legal mechanics of ground lease acquisition. Unlike buying a house or even vacant land, purchasing an existing ground lease involved navigating a complex web of county regulations, zoning requirements, and tenant rights laws. I spent hours after work at the Vermont State Law Library, reading through decades of case law and municipal codes, teaching myself concepts that most real estate attorneys charged hundreds of dollars per hour to explain. The process was surprisingly straightforward once I understood the framework. Millbrook County held regular auctions for surplus assets, including ground leases that were approaching renewal deadlines. The auction for my parents' lease was scheduled for 6 weeks away, with a minimum bid of $175,000 and bidding open to any qualified buyer. I would need to provide proof of funds, submit a registration application, and attend the auction in person to participate. More importantly, I discovered that Vermont law required leaseholders to notify current tenants of any ownership change, but only after the sale was completed. My parents wouldn't know their lease had been sold until I chose to tell them, giving me complete control over the timing and circumstances of the revelation. The financial logistics were more complex than I'd initially calculated. The minimum bid of $175,000 was within my reach, but I needed to plan for competitive bidding that could drive the price higher. I also had to account for legal fees, transfer taxes, and administrative costs that would add another $15,000 to the total investment. After running the numbers multiple times, I determined that I could safely bid up to $210,000 without compromising my financial security. To raise the additional capital I might need, I made the difficult decision to liquidate my retirement accounts early. The penalty fees were substantial, but the psychological value of owning my parents' land was worth more to me than any long-term investment return. I also took on additional freelance consulting projects, working late into the night to build up my cash reserves as much as possible before the auction date. The hardest part was maintaining normal family relationships while planning what amounted to a financial ambush. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became exercises in self-control as I listened to them worry about retirement planning and discuss their concerns about making ends meet in their golden years. The irony of their financial anxiety was almost unbearable when I knew exactly why they were struggling and was actively planning to add a new monthly expense to their budget. Savannah's continued success stories were particularly difficult to endure during this period. She had just closed on her 4th property, a charming Victorian cottage that Marcus had identified and financed, and was basking in the glow of family admiration. Our parents couldn't stop talking about her impressive portfolio and her natural talent for identifying undervalued properties. "Madison, you really should ask Savannah for some investment advice," Mom suggested during one dinner, while Savannah held court about her latest renovation plans. "She's learned so much about real estate strategy. I'm sure she could help you. Identify some starter opportunities." Starter opportunities. As if I was a complete novice who needed guidance from someone whose primary qualification was having access to someone else's money. "I'm still learning about the market," I replied, cutting my roast beef and keeping my expression neutral. "Maybe once I feel more confident about the fundamentals." What I didn't mention was that I was about to make the most sophisticated real estate investment any member of our family had ever attempted, using knowledge and capital I had accumulated entirely through my own efforts. The weeks leading up to the auction were filled with careful preparation and mounting anticipation. I researched every comparable ground lease sale in Vermont over the past 5 years, studying bidding patterns and final sale prices to develop a strategy for the auction. I consulted with 3 different real estate attorneys to ensure I understood all the legal implications of lease ownership, including my rights and responsibilities as a landlord. Most importantly, I had to maintain absolute operational security. I couldn't risk word of my plans reaching my family before the sale was completed, which meant I couldn't confide in anyone who might have connections to my parents or Savannah. I was completely alone with my secret, which made the pressure even more intense, but also made the eventual payoff even more satisfying to anticipate. The psychological preparation was almost as important as the financial and legal groundwork. I was about to fundamentally alter my family's power dynamic in a way that couldn't be undone or minimized. Once I owned their land, I would hold a form of leverage over my parents that no amount of favoritism toward Savannah could overcome. They would have to acknowledge my capabilities, respect my business acumen, and treat me as an equal rather than a supporting character in their family narrative. But I also had to be prepared for the emotional fallout. My parents would likely feel betrayed, manipulated, and embarrassed when they discovered what I had done. Savannah would probably be furious that I had upstaged her real estate success in such a dramatic fashion. The family dynamics that had defined my entire life were about to be permanently destroyed, and there would be no going back to the way things were. As the auction date approached, I found myself oscillating between excitement and terror. This was either going to be the most brilliant strategic move of my life, or a spectacular act of self-destruction that would cost me my family relationships forever. But after years of being overlooked, underestimated, and taken for granted, I was ready to accept those consequences in exchange for finally being seen as someone who mattered. 3 days before the auction, I received an unexpected phone call that nearly derailed my entire plan. It was my mother, and her voice carried a note of anxiety I had rarely heard before. "Madison, honey, I hope you don't mind me asking, but you work at the bank. Do you know anything about ground leases? Your father and I received some paperwork from the county, and we're not sure what it means." My heart nearly stopped. Had they somehow discovered the upcoming auction? Were they planning to bid on their own lease to prevent it from being sold to a stranger? "Ground leases can be complex," I said carefully. "What kind of paperwork did you receive?" "It's just a notice about some kind of auction. We're not really sure what it's about, but it mentions our address. Do you think we should be concerned?" It was the standard pre-auction notification that the county sent to all affected properties. They had no idea what it meant or what was at stake, which meant my secret was still safe. But it also meant I was running out of time to execute my plan before they figured out what was happening and potentially took steps to protect themselves. "It's probably just routine county business," I told her, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But if you're worried, you might want to call the county office for clarification." "Oh, you know how your father is with government paperwork. He'll probably just file it away and forget about it." "Perfect. That would give me exactly the window I needed to complete the purchase before they understood what had happened." The auction was in 72 hours, and I was about to become the owner of the land beneath my parents' house. Everything I had worked for, saved for, and planned for was about to culminate in a single morning that would change my family's dynamic forever. I just hoped I was ready for the consequences of getting everything I had ever wanted. The morning of the auction arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Vermont look like a postcard. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before my alarm, my mind racing with final preparations and worst-case scenarios. I had laid out my clothes the night before, a conservative navy blazer, pressed slacks, and my most professional shoes, because I wanted to project absolute competence and seriousness when I walked into that county building. The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Millbrook County Administrative Complex, a brutally modern concrete building that housed everything from tax assessments to marriage licenses. I arrived at 8:45 a.m. with a cashier's check for $220,000 in my briefcase, along with copies of every document I might need to prove my financial qualifications and legal standing as a bidder. The auction room was smaller than I had expected, with perhaps 20 plastic chairs arranged in front of a folding table where county officials would conduct the proceedings. Only 7 other people were present when I arrived, and most of them appeared to be professional investors or real estate developers based on their expensive suits and casual familiarity with the process. I recognized one face immediately: Harold Pemberton, a local developer who had been buying up properties throughout Millbrook Falls for the past decade. He was known for aggressive bidding and deep pockets, which meant I might face serious competition for my parents' lease. The thought made my stomach clench with anxiety, but I reminded myself that I had prepared for this possibility and had enough capital to compete with anyone in the room. The county clerk, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who had conducted hundreds of these auctions, called the session to order at exactly 10 a.m. She explained the bidding process in the monotone voice of bureaucratic routine: minimum bids, increment requirements, payment deadlines, and legal obligations of successful bidders. "Today, we have 12 ground leases available for auction," she announced, consulting her clipboard. "We'll proceed in order of property address, starting with 223 Elmwood Street." My parents' property at 847 Willowbrook Drive was 7th on the list, which gave me 45 minutes to watch the other auctions and assess the bidding patterns of my competition. The early properties were smaller parcels in less desirable neighborhoods, selling for amounts ranging from $85,000 to $145,000. With minimal competitive bidding, most participants seemed to be targeting specific properties rather than bidding on everything available. When the clerk finally announced 847 Willowbrook Drive, Ridgemont Heights, minimum bid $175,000, my heart rate spiked so dramatically that I was certain everyone in the room could hear it pounding. "Do I have an opening bid of $175,000? Harold Pemberton raised his hand immediately. Of course he did. Ridgemont Heights was exactly the kind of upscale neighborhood that attracted his development projects. $175,000 to bidder 7, the clerk acknowledged. "Do I have $180,000? I raised my hand, trying to project more confidence than I felt. $180,000. To bidder 3, "Do I have $185,000? Pemberton countered without hesitation. A third bidder I hadn't noticed earlier joined the competition at $190,000. This was exactly what I had hoped to avoid, but I was committed to seeing it through. The bidding continued in steady $5,000 increments: $195,000, $200,000, $205,000. By the time we reached $210,000, the third bidder had dropped out, leaving just me and Pemberton locked in what felt like a financial duel with my family's future as the prize. $10,000 to bidder 7, the clerk announced, after Pemberton's latest bid. "Do I have $215,000? This was my moment of truth. $215,000 was at the absolute top of my budget, leaving me with barely $5,000 in reserves for closing costs and legal fees. If Pemberton countered again, I would be forced to either exceed my financial limits or watch someone else purchase the land beneath my parents' house. I raised my hand. $215,000 to bidder 3. Do I have $220,000? Pemberton looked at me for the first time during the auction, clearly trying to assess whether I was serious about continuing to bid. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, he shook his head. Going once at $215,000, going twice, sold to bidder 3 for $215,000. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. I had done it. I now owned the ground lease for 847 Willowbrook Drive, which meant I was officially my parents' landlord. The administrative procedures following the auction passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and official stamps. I provided my cashier's check, completed the transfer documents, and received a temporary certificate of ownership that would be replaced by the official deed within 10 business days. The county clerk explained my rights and responsibilities as the new leaseholder, including the requirement to provide formal notice to current tenants within 30 days of the sale. Walking out of the county building at 11:47 a.m., I felt like I was moving through a dream. The autumn sun seemed brighter, the air seemed clearer, and every step carried the weight of a decision that had fundamentally altered my relationship with my family forever. I was no longer Madison, the overlooked daughter. I was Madison, the property owner, Madison, the landlord, Madison, the person who would finally be impossible to ignore or dismiss. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process what I had accomplished and plan my next moves. I needed to consult with my attorney about the formal notification process, research fair market rental rates for similar properties, and decide how and when to reveal my new status to my family. Most importantly, I needed to prepare for their buy reactions. My parents would likely cycle through disbelief, anger, and possibly respect once they understood the sophistication of what I had accomplished. Savannah would probably be furious that I had upstaged her real estate portfolio with a single strategic purchase that required more market knowledge and financial planning than any of her Marcus-funded acquisitions. But for the first time in my adult life, their reactions didn't matter as much as my own satisfaction. I had identified an opportunity, developed a strategy, and executed it flawlessly using knowledge and capital I had accumulated through my own efforts. This wasn't a gift from a wealthy boyfriend or a subsidized investment funded by borrowed money. This was pure merit-based success that nobody could minimize or explain away. That afternoon, I called my attorney to begin the formal notification process. Vermont law required that I provide written notice to my parents within 30 days, but it didn't specify the exact timeline or method of delivery. I could send a certified letter, deliver the notice in person, or even have it served by a process server. But after years of being excluded from important family decisions and having my achievements overlooked, I decided that my parents deserved to learn about their new landlord in the most dramatic and undeniable way possible. I was going to hand-deliver their eviction notice myself, in person, and watch their faces as they realized that their underachieving daughter had just become the most successful real estate investor in the family. The revenge was going to be absolutely perfect. The 10 days between the auction and receiving my official deed were perhaps the most surreal period of my entire life. I continued showing up to work at Granite State Financial, processing mortgage applications and attending meetings as if nothing had changed, while secretly knowing that I now owned the land beneath my parents' house. Every interaction with my family during this period carried an electric undercurrent of anticipation that I had to carefully conceal. The hardest part was maintaining normal behavior during our regular family Sunday dinner, which fell just 5 days after the auction. Sitting at my parents' dining room table, eating my mother's pot roast while knowing that I was technically their landlord, required every ounce of self-control I possessed. The irony was almost overwhelming. They were serving me dinner on the property that I now controlled. completely oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred in our family dynamic. Savannah was particularly animated that evening, describing her latest property acquisition with the kind of breathless enthusiasm that our parents always encouraged. She had just closed on a small commercial building that Marcus planned to convert into luxury condominiums, and she was basking in the glow of being called a visionary investor by the local real estate community. "The key is seeing potential where other people see problems," she explained, gesturing with her wine glass while our parents nodded appreciatively. "Most investors looked at this building and saw outdated electrical systems and cosmetic damage. I saw character and possibility. Character and possibility that Marcus had identified, financed, and would personally oversee the renovation of. But those details never made it into Savannah's presentations. Madison, you should really come look at the property," she continued, turning to me with that condescending smile I had grown to despise. "It might help you understand what serious real estate investment looks like. I could walk you through my analysis process, explain how I evaluate potential returns." Her analysis process. As if she had developed sophisticated investment criteria, rather than simply agreeing with whatever Marcus recommended. "That sounds educational," I replied, cutting my pot roast with deliberate precision. "I'm always interested in learning from successful investors." What I didn't mention was that I had already revolutionized the family's real estate dynamics in a way that would make her commercial building purchase look like a training exercise. The conversation inevitably turned to my parents' financial planning, a topic that had become increasingly common as they approached their mid-60s. They spoke vaguely about making some adjustments to their retirement timeline and exploring different options for managing their expenses. I listened to this discussion with the detached fascination of someone who knew exactly why they were experiencing financial pressure and was about to become part of their solution. "Real estate has been such a blessing for our family," Mom said, refilling everyone's wine glasses. "Between the equity in this house and Savannah's growing portfolio, we feel very secure about the future." Secure about the future. If only they knew that their house's equity was about to start generating monthly income for their younger daughter, instead of simply appreciating in value for their own benefit. The deed arrived by certified mail on a Thursday morning, delivered to my apartment. While I was at work, I picked it up from the post office during my lunch break, carrying the manila envelope back to my car with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. Sitting in the parking lot behind Granite State Financial, I opened the envelope and stared at the official document that made my ownership of 847 Willowbrook Drive legally binding and irrevocable. The language was dense and technical, full of legal terminology about heirs and assigns and covenant running with the land. But the essential facts were beautifully clear. Madison Elena Torres was now the fee simple owner of the ground lease for the property where Robert and Linda Torres resided. I was their landlord, and they didn't even know it yet. That evening, I called my attorney to discuss the notification process and my rights as the new leaseholder. Vermont law was surprisingly favorable to landowners in ground lease situations. I could charge fair market rent for the land use, which my attorney estimated would be between $1,800 and $2,200 per month for a property of that size and location. I could also establish reasonable terms and conditions for the lease, including maintenance requirements and use restrictions. More importantly, I had the legal right to require lease payments to begin within 60 days of notification, which meant my parents would need to start budgeting for a substantial new monthly expense almost immediately. The beauty of ground leases from the landowner's perspective, my attorney explained, is that they're essentially guaranteed income streams. The tenant has too much invested in the improvements to walk away, so they almost always agree to pay rather than face the cost of relocating. Almost always. The phrase carried an implicit threat that made this situation even more delicious. My parents had invested 12 years and probably $150,000 in improvements to their house. They couldn't simply move away to avoid paying rent. They would lose everything they had put into the property. I spent the weekend researching comparable rental rates and drafting the formal notification letter that would inform my parents of their new financial obligation. The letter needed to be professional, legally compliant, and absolutely clear about the changed circumstances, but I also wanted it to carry just enough personal edge to make them understand that this wasn't some random business transaction. The final version was a masterpiece of controlled aggression disguised as bureaucratic necessity. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Torres," it began, "please be advised that as of October 15th, I have acquired ownership of the ground lease for the property located at 847 Willowbrook Drive, Ridgemont Heights, Vermont. As the new leaseholder, I am required by Vermont state law to notify you of this ownership change and establish terms for your continued residence on the property." The letter went on to explain their new monthly rental obligation of $1,950, the 60-day deadline for first payment, and the legal consequences of non-compliance. I had struck a balance between fair market rates and financial pressure, enough to impact their budget significantly, but not enough to force them into immediate financial crisis. The signature line was where I allowed myself a moment of personal satisfaction. Sincerely, Madison E. Torres, property owner. Property owner. After years of being dismissed as someone who would never amount to anything in real estate, I was now signing legal documents with that exact title. I had originally planned to mail the letter via certified mail, maintaining the formal distance of a business transaction. But as I sat in my apartment that Sunday evening, holding the completed notification in my hands, I realized that anonymous delivery would rob me of the single moment I had been unconsciously working toward for years. I wanted to see their faces when they realized what I had accomplished. I wanted to watch the exact moment when their understanding of our family dynamic shifted forever. I wanted to be present when they finally had to acknowledge that their underachieving daughter had just executed the most sophisticated real estate transaction any member of our family had ever completed. Monday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. I spent an hour getting dressed, choosing clothes that projected authority and confidence. I practiced different approaches to delivering the news, rehearsing responses to the various reactions they might have. By 10:30 a.m., I was sitting in my car outside their house, holding the notification letter and gathering the courage to walk up to their front door and permanently alter our family's power structure. The house looked exactly the same as always: pristine landscaping, expensive, cars in the driveway, the kind of suburban perfection that had always made me feel like an outsider looking in. But now I saw it differently. Now I saw it as my property, my investment, my source of monthly income. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked toward their front door, carrying the news that would change everything forever. I stood on my parents' front porch for nearly 3 full minutes, notification letter in hand, listening to the familiar sounds of their Monday morning routine filtering through the door. Mom's morning talk show playing on the kitchen television, Dad's coffee grinder whirring to life, the comfortable domestic symphony of 2 people who had no idea their world was about to be turned completely upside down. When I finally rang the doorbell, the sound seemed unnaturally loud in the crisp October air. I heard Mom's footsteps approaching, then the deadbolt turning, and suddenly I was face to face with her confused but pleased expression. "Madison, what a lovely surprise," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I wasn't expecting you until Sunday. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I replied, stepping into the foyer that I now technically owned. "I just needed to discuss something important with you and Dad. Is he available?" The concern in her voice was immediate. "Of course, sweetheart. He's in the kitchen. You sound so serious. Are you sure nothing's wrong?" If only she knew how loaded that question was. I followed her through the living room, past the family photos that chronicled years of Savannah's achievements and my notable absences, toward the kitchen where Dad was reading the morning paper with his usual cup of black coffee. "Look who's here," Mom announced cheerfully. "Madison stopped by to discuss something important." Dad looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, and gave me the kind of distracted smile reserved for unexpected interruptions to his morning routine. "Madison, good to see you. What brings you by on a Monday morning? Shouldn't you be at work?" "I took the day off," I said, settling into the kitchen chair across from him. "I have some news that couldn't wait until the weekend." Mom poured herself a cup of coffee and joined us at the table, her expression shifting from pleased surprise to mild concern. "News? Good news, I hope?" This was the moment I had been anticipating for weeks, the exact instant when I would finally reveal the magnitude of what I had accomplished. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the notification letter, placing it on the table between us with deliberate ceremony. "I'm afraid this is a formal business matter," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I need to provide you with official notification regarding your property." Dad's eyebrows furrowed as he reached for the letter. "Property notification? Madison, what are you talking about?" "Just read it," I said quietly. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in that house. I watched Dad's eyes move across the page, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching shock. Mom leaned over to read along, her hand gradually rising to cover her mouth as the implications became clear. "This is a joke," Dad said finally, his voice hoarse. "This has to be some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake," I replied calmly. "As of October 15th, I am the legal owner of the ground lease for this property. You are now my tenants." Mom's coffee cup clattered against her saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. "Madison, what have you done?" "I bought the land under your house," I said, the words carrying a satisfaction I had been anticipating for months. The same way Savannah buys her investment properties, except I did it with my own money and my own expertise. Dad was rereading the letter, clearly hoping the words would change if he looked at them enough times. "But we own this house. We've lived here for 12 years. We paid off the mortgage." "You own the house," I corrected. "I own the land it sits on. Your deed gives you ownership of the improvements, but the ground lease has always been separate. The county was selling it, and I bought it." "How?" Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "How is this even possible?" This was the moment I had been waiting for, the opportunity to demonstrate exactly how much my family had underestimated my capabilities. "It's possible because I understand real estate law better than you realize," I explained, enjoying the look of dawning comprehension on their faces. "My job at the bank gives me access to property records, market analysis, and legal documentation that most people never see. I've been learning about ground leases, investment opportunities, and property acquisition for years, while you've been dismissing my career as just a regular job." Dad found his voice, though it carried an edge I had rarely heard before. "Madison, this is vindictive. This is your family's home. This is business," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "The same way Savannah's real estate investments are business. The same way Marcus's development projects are business. I identified an opportunity, analyzed the investment potential, and executed a strategic purchase." "But why?" Mom's eyes were filling with tears now. "Why would you do this to us?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, but I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. "Because you've spent my entire life telling me I'd never amount to anything in real estate." "Like Savannah," I said, my voice remaining calm despite the emotional weight of the words. "Because you've funded her success with money you borrowed against this house, while telling me I needed to be more realistic about my goals. Because you've treated me like a supporting character in Savannah's story for so long that you forgot I had my own ambitions." Dad's face was pale now, the implications clearly sinking in. "Madison, we never meant to make you feel—" "You never meant to get caught," I interrupted. "I know about the refinancing application. I know about the monthly payments to Savannah. I know exactly how you've been financing her real estate empire while telling me I should focus on something more suited to my strengths. The silence that followed was deafening. They stared at me like I was a stranger, someone they had never seen before despite 28 years of shared family history. "What do you want?" Dad asked finally. "I want market-rate rent for my property," I said, consulting the letter. $1,950 per month starting December 1st. That's actually below market rate for a property of this size and location. Mom made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "We can't afford that, Madison. You know our financial situation." "I know your financial situation better than you think," I replied. "I also know that it's been shaped by your decision to prioritize Savannah's success over your own financial security. That's not my problem to solve." Dad's hands were shaking now as he set the letter down. "This is our home, Madison. We raised you here. You raised me here to believe that I wasn't worth the same investment you made in Savannah," I said. "You raised me to think that my achievements didn't matter as much as hers, that my dreams weren't as valid as hers, that my success wasn't as important as hers. Well, now you get to see exactly what those assumptions cost you." The kitchen clock ticked, loudly in the silence that followed. My parents sat frozen, clearly struggling to process this new reality where their overlooked daughter held the power and they were the ones asking for consideration. "You have 60 days to make your first payment," I said, standing up and returning the letter to my briefcase. "After that, we can discuss a formal lease agreement that protects both our interests." As I walked toward the door, Mom's voice followed me, broken and desperate. "Madison, please. We can work this out as a family." I paused in the doorway and turned back to face them one final time. "We're not family," I said quietly. "We're landlord and tenants. You made sure of that years ago." And with that, I walked out of their house, my house, leaving them to contemplate the new reality where their underestimated daughter had become their landlord. The drive back to my apartment that Monday afternoon felt like traveling through a completely different world than the one I had woken up in that morning. Every familiar street, every landmark I had passed thousands of times before seemed to carry new significance now that I had fundamentally altered my family's power structure. I was no longer Madison, the overlooked daughter driving home from another disappointing family interaction. I was Madison, the property owner, returning from the most satisfying conversation of my adult life. My phone started ringing before I had even reached downtown Millbrook Falls. The first call was from my mother, which I let go to voicemail. Then my father called twice in rapid succession, followed by 3 more calls from my mother. I turned off the ringer and focused on driving, knowing that whatever emotional appeals they were preparing could wait until I was ready to hear them. Back, in my studio apartment above Chen's bakery, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I had been saving for a special occasion and finally listened to their messages. The progression from shock to anger to desperation was exactly what I had expected, but hearing it played out in real time was more satisfying than I had anticipated. "Madison, please call us back." My mother's first message began. "We need to talk about this situation. Surely we can work something out." My father's approach was more direct. "Madison, this is unacceptable. You cannot hold your family's home hostage over some perceived slight. Call us immediately." But it was my mother's final message that revealed how completely the situation had shaken them. "Sweetheart, I don't understand what we did wrong. We love you. We've always been proud of you. Please don't do this to us." The irony of her sudden declarations of love and pride wasn't lost on me. 28 years of systematic neglect, financial inequality, and casual dismissal of my achievements, and now that I held the power in our relationship, she was suddenly eager to express her appreciation for me. I was midway through my second glass of wine when I heard familiar footsteps on the stairs leading to my apartment. Chen knocked softly on my door, carrying a plate of his wife's homemade dumplings and wearing the expression of someone who had witnessed an unusual amount of phone activity from downstairs. "Madison," he said when I opened the door. "Everything. Okay? Your phone rang many times today. May worry about you." The Chens had become surrogate parents to me over the past 3 years, showing more genuine care and interest in my well-being than my actual parents had demonstrated in recent memory. They deserved to know what was happening, especially since the inevitable family drama was likely to spill over into their peaceful bakery. "Everything's fine, Wei," I said, accepting the dumplings gratefully. "Actually, everything's better than fine. I just made the best investment of my life." Over the next hour, I explained the entire situation to Wei and May, who listened with the fascination of people watching a real-life soap opera unfold. They asked practical questions about ground leases and rental agreements, offered perspectives on family dynamics from their own cultural background, and ultimately expressed the kind of pride in my accomplishment that I had hoped to receive from my actual parents. "Very smart girl," May said, nodding approvingly as she refilled my teacup. "Your family not see what we see, but now they must see." "They see," Wei agreed. "Now they understand Madison is not little girl who need help. Madison is businesswoman, who make her own success." Their validation meant more to me than they could possibly know. The next 2 weeks brought a steady stream of increasingly desperate communication attempts from my family. My parents called daily, left voicemails ranging from angry to pleading, and even showed up at my office at Granite State Financial twice before I asked security to escort them away. They seemed unable to accept that their financial situation was now entirely dependent on their previously overlooked daughter's generosity. But the most interesting development was Savannah's reaction. She called me exactly once, 3 days after I had delivered the notification letter, and her tone was unlike anything I had ever heard from her before. "Madison," she said, her voice tight with what sounded like barely controlled fury, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm managing my real estate portfolio," I replied calmly. "The same thing you do with your properties. This is different, and you know it. This is Mom and Dad's house." "This is my property," I corrected. "And they're my tenants. If you have a problem with that arrangement, you're welcome to help them with the rent." The silence that followed was telling. Savannah, despite her supposed real estate success, apparently didn't have an extra $2,000 per month available to solve her parents' financial crisis. "You're being vindictive," she said finally. "I'm being businesslike," I replied. "I identified an investment opportunity, executed a strategic purchase, and I'm now seeking market-rate returns on my capital. Isn't that exactly what Marcus taught you about real estate investment?" She hung up without responding, but her call told me everything I needed to know about how my family was processing this new dynamic. They were angry, desperate, and completely unprepared to deal with a version of Madison who refused to be taken for granted. The formal lease negotiation took place 3 weeks later in my attorney's office. My parents arrived looking defeated and exhausted, accompanied by a lawyer they could barely afford, and carrying financial documents that revealed the true extent of their precarious situation. The monthly payments to Savannah had stopped, I noticed, which suggested they were finally prioritizing their own survival over funding her lifestyle. We reached an agreement that was fair, but firm. $1,950 per month in rent, with annual increases tied to local property tax assessments. I agreed to handle major structural maintenance and repairs, while they remained responsible for utilities and routine upkeep. Most importantly, the lease included a clause allowing them to purchase the land back from me at fair market value, if they ever managed to accumulate the necessary capital. "This feels like extortion," my father muttered as he signed the documents. "This feels like business," I replied. "The same kind of business you've been praising Savannah for conducting with other people's properties." 6 months later, the new dynamic had settled into something resembling normalcy. My parents paid their rent on time each month. Our interactions were polite but distant, and family gatherings had become significantly less frequent and much more subdued. Savannah's real estate empire had contracted somewhat without the steady flow of parental subsidies, but she and Marcus were apparently managing to maintain their lifestyle through other means. The most unexpected development was the respect I had finally earned from extended family members who had previously dismissed me as the unremarkable daughter. Word of my strategic property acquisition had spread through our social circle, and I found myself being consulted on investment opportunities and asked for financial advice by relatives who had never shown interest in my opinions before. Madison always was the smart one, Aunt Carol said during a recent family wedding, apparently forgetting decades of fawning over Savannah's achievements. We just didn't realize how smart. But the greatest satisfaction came from the quiet moments in my apartment when I would review my monthly rental income and reflect on the journey that had brought me from overlooked daughter to property owner. I had proven that careful planning, professional expertise, and strategic thinking could accomplish more than charm, connections, and borrowed money. Every month when my parents' rent payment appeared in my bank account, it represented more than just investment income. It was tangible proof that I had finally escaped the family narrative that had defined and confined me for so long. I was no longer the supporting character in Savannah's story. I had written my own story, and it was better than anything they had ever imagined for me. The land beneath their house would always be mine, which meant they would never again be able to take me for granted or dismiss my capabilities. I had ensured that our family's power dynamic would never return to what it had been before, and that knowledge brought me a peace I had been seeking my entire adult life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting ahead. The confrontation I had been dreading finally came 8 months after I had become my parents' landlord, delivered in the form of an unexpected visit from Savannah on a rainy Thursday evening in June. I was in my apartment, reviewing financial projections for a potential second property investment, when I heard her familiar voice downstairs arguing with Chen about whether she could go up to my apartment uninvited. "Madison," she called from the bottom of the stairs. "We need to talk. Now." I opened my door to find her standing halfway up the narrow staircase, her designer heels clicking against the wooden steps and her face flushed with the kind of righteous anger I hadn't seen since we were teenagers fighting over bathroom time. "What do you want, Savannah?" I asked, not bothering to invite her inside. "I want you to stop destroying our family," she said, pushing past me into my studio apartment. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Mom and Dad?" I closed the door and turned to face her, noting how out of place she looked among my modest furnishings and carefully organized life. Savannah had always been larger than life, but in my small apartment, she seemed almost cartoonish in her desperation to command attention. "I've provided them with market-rate housing," I replied calmly. "What have you done for them lately?" "I've been trying to help them figure out how to afford your ridiculous rent demands," she shot back. "They're talking about selling the house, Madison. Selling the house they've lived in for 12 years because their own daughter is bleeding them dry." The accusation stung, but not in the way she intended. Instead of feeling guilty, I felt a surge of satisfaction that my strategy was working exactly as planned. "They're welcome to sell," I said, settling into my desk chair and forcing her to remain standing. "I'll be happy to negotiate a fair purchase. Price for my land with whoever buys the improvements." "Your land," she repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound like some kind of predatory landlord." "I sound like a business owner," I corrected. "Which is apparently something you never learned to be, despite all those years of playing real estate investor with Marcus's money." That hit home. Savannah's face went pale, and for a moment, the confident facade cracked enough to reveal the insecurity beneath. "At least I didn't buy my success by holding my family hostage," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "You bought your success by bankrupting them instead." "Tell me, Savannah, when was the last time you asked Mom and Dad how they were financing all those gifts and loans they gave you?" When was the last time you wondered why they were always so eager to help fund your projects, but never seemed to have money for their own retirement? She stared at me, clearly struggling with the implications of what I was saying. I never asked. Them too. You never asked them anything, I interrupted. You just accepted everything they offered and assumed it was unlimited. Did you know they took out a second mortgage to help you buy your first investment property? Did you know they've been carrying over $30,000 in credit card debt to cover the gap between their income and their expenses? The silence that followed told me she hadn't known, or more likely hadn't wanted to know. That's not my fault, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. You're right, I agreed. It's not your fault that they chose to prioritize your success over their own financial security. But it's also not my responsibility to subsidize their poor decisions by giving them free housing. Savannah sank into my single armchair, looking deflated for the first time since she had arrived. So what happens now? You just keep collecting rent from our parents until they're forced to move into some awful apartment somewhere? What happens now is that our family learns to function like adults instead of enablers and dependents, I said. Mom and Dad learn to live within their means. You learn to build your business without parental subsidies. And I learned to be respected for my actual capabilities instead of dismissed as the reliable backup daughter. Is that what this is really about? She asked, looking up at me with something approaching genuine curiosity. You feeling unappreciated? The question was clearly meant to minimize my motivations, to reduce my carefully planned strategy to simple sibling jealousy. But I had moved far beyond needing her validation or understanding. This is about creating a new equilibrium, I explained. For 28 years, our family operated on the assumption that you were the valuable daughter, and I was the expendable one. You got the investments, the support, the celebration, and the assumption of future success. I got the expectation that I would be grateful for whatever scraps of attention were left over. I stood up and walked to my window, looking down at the quiet street below where the Chens were closing their bakery for the evening. But it turns out that being expendable taught me things that being precious never could, I continued. It taught me self-reliance, financial discipline, and strategic thinking. It taught me to see opportunities that other people miss and to act on them decisively. And ultimately, it positioned me to execute the most sophisticated real estate transaction any member of our family has ever completed. When I turned back to face her, Savannah was staring at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in our lives. You really hate us, don't you? She said softly. I don't hate you, I replied, and I was surprised to realize it was true. I just don't need your approval anymore. For the first time in my life, I have something that nobody can take away from me or minimize or explain away. I have power, and I'm not giving it up to make anyone else more comfortable. She sat quietly for several minutes, apparently processing this new version of her little sister who refused to apologize for her success or accommodate other people's comfort at her own expense. The rent is really hurting them, she said eventually. Then help them pay it, I suggested. Use some of that real estate expertise you've developed to generate additional income. Downsize your own lifestyle to help support theirs. Make the same sacrifices for them that they made for you. I can't, she admitted. Marcus and I are stretched pretty thin ourselves. We've been depending on Mom and Dad helping us more than I realized. It was the first honest thing she had said since arriving at my apartment. Then maybe it's time for both of you to learn what I learned years ago, I said. How to succeed without a safety net. Savannah left 20 minutes later, but not before extracting a promise that I would consider a family meeting to discuss working together to resolve the situation. I agreed, knowing that such a meeting would only reinforce my position as the family member who held the power to solve or perpetuate their problems. 3 days later, we all gathered in my parents' living room. My living room, technically, for what would prove to be the most honest conversation our family had ever had. The discussion lasted nearly 4 hours and covered decades of resentment, favoritism, and misplaced priorities that had finally come to a head. By the end of that meeting, we had established new ground rules for our relationships that acknowledged my success, respected my independence, and created space for genuine rather than performative family connections. My parents would continue paying rent, but they would also begin receiving credit for the years of support they had provided to Savannah. She would start contributing to their expenses in proportion to the benefits she had received, and I would be recognized as an equal partner in family decisions, rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the warm, fuzzy reconciliation that might end a movie about family dysfunction. But it was honest, sustainable, and built on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than exploitation. 6 months later, I purchased my second investment property, a small apartment building that I renovated using knowledge gained from my rental arrangement with my parents. This time, when I announced my expansion into commercial real estate, the family response was congratulatory rather than dismissive. I had finally achieved something I hadn't even realized I wanted. A family that saw me clearly, respected my capabilities, and valued my contributions. It had taken becoming their landlord to get there, but the destination was worth the unconventional journey. Sometimes the best way to save a family is to stop letting them take you for granted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.